Okay, so we are live. Hi everyone. Welcome to the live stream. We have here Hassan, so I'll allow Hassan to introduce himself and then we can go ahead. Hassan, you can take it up.
All right. Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here today, and for this session about TanStack Query Firebase. Ideally, as we get to dive in and see, how does TanStack Query Firebase make people's apps amazing? How does it support you in whichever application you're going to be building? But for us to get started, let me just go ahead and present my screen. All right, here we go. Um, yeah, I do hope you can see my screen. And, today we are basically going to be talking about TanStack Query Firebase. And, as we talk about TanStack Query Firebase, we're going to actually build an app. And, I'm super excited about that, a real-time task manager. And we're going to use TanStack Query Firebase, we're going to leverage Firebase and, get to see how we can be able to perform mutations and, query data. Yeah, really exciting stuff. But my name is Hassan Bahati. I am a tech lead at Policy, and I'm also a maintainer of the library TanStack Query Firebase. You can find me on X as Hassan Bahati M, and GitHub as well, Hassan Bahati. Yeah, that's a brief about me. But for us to get started as to why we're here today, it's very, very handy for us to actually get to know what Firebase is. And if maybe you're hearing Firebase for the very first time, Firebase is an app development platform that helps developers, build, launch, and manage web applications. When we talk about building, that whole process of you setting up your application, Firebase giving you the tools, enabling you to go live, basically launching. We're talking about you can be able to host your platform, host your app on Firebase, on app hosting, and so many other services that Firebase does offer. And it's not limited to that. It also gets to support a couple of front end frameworks, supporting a couple of libraries for you to be able to have your app go live and be able to manage it. But it's not limited to that. You can as well manage your application with Firebase and easily, not just managing. So what this looks like is that Firebase as well enables you to get insight into how people are interacting with your application. It enables you to interact with your customers and users. This is through services like Firebase, um, Firebase Cloud Messaging, and a bunch of others that as we are going to explore that. That's a brief about Firebase, and it's also very, very safe to say Firebase is a collection of tools and services that empower developers to succeed. Ideally, the best tools that you might want to use to have a successful application, a very reliable application, you can be able to get that with Firebase. And but digging a little deeper into Firebase, we talked about Firebase giving you the tools to build, and it's a suite of so many things that range from storage, authentication, real-time database, cloud first, so hosting, and machine learning, and these days there's GenKit as well, and a bunch of other services. But when you look at storage, you can basically be able to have an object storage where you can store files, images, and access them easily. Under authentication, you can be able to integrate with so many providers, ranging from Google to GitHub to X and any other provider you might want. So ideally, you don't get to focus on things that are already built for you off the shelf. This saves you a bunch of time to get to concentrate on your application and business logic. But beyond that, Firebase as well offers you a real-time database if you're looking to build some real-time stuff. Cloud Firestore as well. Hosting, you can leverage up hosting as well, and so many others. So this is some of those tools and services that Firebase gets to avail you with, when you're building. So ideally, setting you up for success from the word go. But Firebase is just not it just doesn't stop at supporting you to build. It also gets you through the process of releasing your application and monitoring it. With services like Crashlytics, performance monitoring, test lab, app distribution. With these, you can actually be able to get a bunch of insight into how people are interacting with your application, interacting with your website, interacting with whichever platform you've been able to build. And it would be really amazing that you get to try it out and leverage some of these amazing services. And it's just not about that, but you can as well be able to engage with your customers or your users with Firebase. And this is through Crashlytics, analytics, sorry, remote config, A/B testing in case you want to experiment certain features, cloud messaging in case you want to, send messages directly to a couple of platforms, in-app messaging, Google AdMob in case you want to monetize something. That's as well gotten off the shelf with Firebase. So it's really a suite of tools that get you through from when you start thinking about building your app, through the process of building it, giving you the best tools to build, getting you through releasing your application to users, and keeping along with you that journey of engaging with users. But while starting, we talked about TanStack Query Firebase. So it's we can't ignore to talk about TanStack Query. And TanStack Query is basically an asynchronous state management library that makes your web apps. We can't forget to say that it enables you to have up-to-date queries and mutations, and you can as well get things like hashing off the shelf and so many others, off the TanStack query library. So ideally, when we get TanStack query and Firebase, that leads to the birth of TanStack query Firebase, and ideally with TanStack Query Firebase, we are getting the powers of TanStack Query and giving you the best experience to use Firebase. So ideally, we built TanStack Query bindings for Firebase, and this gets to be supported through popular front-end frameworks like React and others. So TanStack Query Firebase, what is it even? So TanStack Query Firebase is a library it's a library that a really powerful library that gets to support a couple of popular front-end frameworks. These ranging from React, Angular, and the likes, and provides a set of hooks, for handling asynchronous tasks with Firebase. So ideally, we get your application to have the best possible experience with TanStack Query Firebase, and ideally, we get you. Ideally, TanStack Query Firebase makes your Firebase powered apps more efficient and leveraging a couple of off-the-shelf pros that you gain from TanStack Query. And if you've been building mobile applications, you've been building web applications, ideally one of the challenging things is state management and state synchronization, caching, background updates, all that kind of stuff can be really complex. And that's why we are thinking that with TanStack Query Firebase, this becomes super easy, and we are going to see how that comes to play. So ideally, we are going to build a real-time expense tracker application, and in this, we shall be able to add and view our expenses, We shall also be able to categorize our expenses, and we shall also be able to synchronize data in real time with Firestore. So that's one of the services from Firebase that we are going to leverage today as we build a real-time expense tracker. So for you to get started with this whole journey today, to be able to build with TanStack Query Firebase, there are some prerequisites that you might want to equip yourself with, and some of these being Node.js and npm installed. This is on whatever machine or tool that you're going to use. So with npm, it could be any other variant, yarn or PNPM, all those are really supported. You can be able to get the libraries you're going to use with that. But you also need Firebase, a Firebase account, and you'd also need to enable Firestore. Ideally, enabling Firestore would mean you've created a Firestore database in Firebase. We are ideally going to see how that comes through and how we get to put that together. Since we are going to be building this application in React, ideally, it's also really handy to have a basic knowledge of React and Firebase. All right, and any other knowledge, not limited to that. All right, so our journey to build a real-time expense tracker. First off, we are going to start by setting up the project. And in setting up the project, we are going to configure Firebase. We shall get through that. And once we are done configuring Firebase, we shall be able to set up TanStack Query Firebase, which is a library that gives us the asynchronous superpowers. And then we shall be able to create mutations. And, our mutation will be in a sense of enabling us to add expenses to our application, and we should be able to see them get added, and also our database should be able to persist them. But once we've added them to Firebase, they're now living in our Firestore database. Our application also needs to know about what we've created. So ideally, we shall also be setting up a couple of queries here and there to be able to visualize our expenses that we've created and so on. All right. So there are a couple of resources that one might want to check out. And one of these is the TanStack Query Firebase documentation. I'll just go ahead and open up that. So in case you want to learn if you want to learn more about TanStack Query Firebase, the documentation is right over here. You can also go ahead and give us a star on GitHub. Would be really appreciated. The GitHub repository will be that. You can just go ahead and start a project. And so this is one of the resources that we do have. And the other resource is TanStack Query. You could as well get to check out TanStack Query. We are going to leverage TanStack Query quite a lot, and a bunch of things from TanStack Query are going to be pulled up, and you'll be able to see that we've really simplified things with TanStack Query Firebase for you to be able to build easily and build amazing applications. But one of the other resources is as well Firebase. For you to access Firebase, you could just go to your browser and type firebase.google.com, and also firebase.com will resolve to this very URL. All right, yeah, those are the major resources that we shall be using today. And the next thing is basically for us to dive into building the application and getting to see how TanStack Query Firebase gets to give us these superpowers, and super excited for this part. So ideally, we're going to build the application locally, and as we talked earlier about some of the prerequisites that you'll ideally need. One of these being a Node.js and npm. So for you to check if you do have Node.js, you can just type node-version, and you should be able to see my version is 23.2.0. And you would also need to have npm. You can also check your npm version using npm --version, and you can see my npm version is 10.9.0. All right, so for us to create our application, we're going to use Vite. And if you want to learn more about Vite, you could as well follow this URL. Yeah, right there. So this is the build tool that we shall be using to basically build our application and also bootstrap it. So for us to get started, we'll just go ahead and write pnpm. Pnpm is just a variant of npm that you might want to use. And in this, as you're getting started, I'll just go ahead and say my application. So ideally, you have to type in your terminal pnpm create vite pnpm space create space vite space and the name of your application. So once you type that, press enter, and you can now go ahead and select a framework that you want to use. We shall be using React, and once you select that, it should be able to give you these options. Do you want to use TypeScript? Do you want to use TypeScript and SWC? Do you want to use JavaScript? Do you want to use React Router 7? Any, name it, whatever you might want. So at least you could just go ahead and select TypeScript. So ideally, it will bootstrap your application, and you should be able to have it in there. So I'll just go ahead and open VS Code with this. All right. So I just got to put together some environmental variables that we shall be using within the application. And we are basically going to see how we get these and where we pick them up from and have them in our project. So as you can see here, we are being told that we shall need to run pnpm install. And we'll just go ahead and run that here in my terminal. Basically, pnpm install is going to install for us packages. Okay, so once we run that, we can just go over the project structure and see what we are getting in here. I'll also just go ahead and magnify my screen a bit so that you can be able to see quite clearly. Okay, so as you can see, I'll just close up this and we shall get to it when we need it. All right, so the very first directory we get to see up here is our Anode modules directory, and this is where all your packages are registered once you get to install them. So whatever we get to see in here is also registered in our package.json under dependencies and dev dependencies. So all these are ideally located, their files and all that other stuff that these packages leverage are being registered in here. We do have a public directory right over here, and most of our static files we would have to place them right in there. Static files could be images if we are going to leverage any, and images, files, and things of that kind. But for us today, most of our work is going to be right in here. You can as well have assets right in here if you want to place them there. And we also do have a CSS file right over here. We shall get rid of this at some point. We do have an app.tsx file, which is currently returning the application that we shall see once we get to run it. But this is basically React. And you can get to see that there's JSX being written in here. You can see that we do have a function called app that does have a counter, leveraging the use state, and rendering a couple of images. Yeah, we shall also clean up this at some point and get to fill in what we shall be working with. Then we also do have an index.css. We shall also kind of get rid of a bunch of things in here. And we also do have the main. So in the main.tsx, this is more like, can I call it the root file of our application. So everything is literally happening over here. So if we remove this app, this application, this app import, ideally we won't be able to see anything. We shall try that out and see. But this is more like the runner of our application. We do have, some TypeScript definitions. We do have our environmental variables. These are some of those that we shall need. We shall need an API key, a Firebase auth domain, a Firebase project ID, a Firebase storage bucket, a Firebase messaging sender ID, and an app ID. We shall get these from Firebase as we get along. But for you to also be able to use these environmental variables in a Vite application, this is how you'd be able to leverage the environmental variables. So shall just copy this at some point and place it wherever I want to use the environment variables right over there. We do have a gitignore file, and literally this is ignoring files that we don't want to push to GitHub or any other to GitHub, to GitLab, or anything else. We do have ESLint configurations in here. We do have our index.html. As we know, this is a single page application, so all that is, our whole application is being rendered through this ID route. And this is basically familiar HTML. So in our package.json, we go to see this. This is where we're basically having the scripts that we shall be using to build and run our application. For development, shall just be using the dev script, and a couple of other packages and libraries are being registered in here. So also when we get to install the libraries that we shall be using, we should also be able to see them getting listed in here as dependencies. But pnpm as a package manager as well has a log file, and basically this is it. We might not want to pay so much attention to that for today, but we also do have a README. So most of these are bootstrapped by Vite for us, as it sets up our template for the application. We do have a TS config, another TS config, and a Vite config. So we might not do so much in some of these other files, but let's go ahead and try to run it and see what we do have as of now. Okay, it will take a little while, and we can see that I do have some other things running on these other ports. That's why you get to see that it's chosen this other one. But if you do not have anything running on those ports, the default is 5173. So we'll just go ahead, copy this, and we shall try to open that in our browser right over here. Okay, so our application is up and running, and you can see that the contents, and basically what's being rendered here are the contents of our app.tsx file. In our app.tsx file, we did have some of these. Ideally, if you get to change anything in here, we should be able to see it changing in real time. Let's just call it real-time expenses tracker application. And we can see it right over here. So if you want to view the documentation of React, it's still available at that. But as you can see, once we get to make a change on the other side, it should be able to show up on this other side as well. So for our application, we shall start by maybe cleaning up a little bit. We won't need most of that stuff. Also right here, we won't need that. We shall also just remove this. We don't need it as of now. We'll also get rid of all that. Forgot that, and we'll just go ahead and format the file to just clean it up a little bit and organize it. So if we get back to our page, we can see that it's kind of broken. Maybe we can just bring back the CSS file and leverage a little styling there and be able to have that centered. So as you can see, all that's being rendered here is what we are getting from this h1 tag. And whatever we write in here is going to be basic HTML that you've probably interacted with sometime, and or written prior to this. But as we talked earlier, that one of the very first things we are going to be doing is setting up Firebase, because that's where our data is going to live. So to set up Firebase, you would have to go to firebase.google.com, and you want to go to console. So I'll just go ahead and select the account, the Google account that I want to use. And when you get to firebase.google.com, you would have to look out for a go to console button. It's usually at the top right. So if I do get to click that, it will take a second and load. And here I can get to see some things I've built up before. But to create a new Firebase project, you would ideally find the create project button right over here. So some of these others are more like previous applications I've created. And also when you get to create any for yourself, it will show up right over here. I'll just go ahead and open this in another tab. Oh, okay. I guess let me so we shall use this. I just set it up for us to save time, but let's also just go over the process of, getting to create a Firebase application if you may be trying out this for the very first time. So when we are at this page that shows all our created projects, and when we get to click create project, we should be able to add a name. Maybe we can call it real-time app, and we can enable joining the Google Developer Program or not. You can opt in or opt out. Then continue. You can enable Gemini or not. It's recommended. And you can also as well continue. Then there's a step with Google Analytics. This is the beauty of building with Firebase, that you get to leverage so many services from Google off the shelf. Firebase directly integrates and seamlessly integrates with a bunch of other services like Google Analytics and so many others, as we explored them earlier. So by turning on these Google Analytics, enabling Google Analytics for this project, we don't need to again create a project in Google Analytics. Once we continue and get through the creation of our project right over here, it should be able to set it up for us, and we shall be able to see it over there. We can go ahead and use the default account for Firebase, and once we click the create project, it should bring us right over here. So once you've created a project, actually we should just go ahead and create. So once you create, it takes a little while, a few seconds. So your project is now being created, resources are being secured for it, and in a few you should be able to see it. Okay, it's almost there. In a few seconds it should be okay, finishing up. Okay, our project is ready, and yeah, we can now continue to view it. So right over here, we are basically done, setting up our application, and this is it. So for us to enable Firestore, ideally, you remember when we're starting, we talked about the categorization of the different services, and Firestore was among the build tools. So once we select build, or when we go to our sidebar and select the build section, we should be able to see Firestore database. And once you click that, it should be able to load in a little while, and so what's happening in the background, our resources are being put together, and we should be able to create our database in a few. So here we can get to see that our Cloud Firestore, it has features like real-time updates, powerful queries, and automating scalability. So ideally with Firestore, we can scale anytime. It leverages, the beauty of having to dynamically add new fields, remove fields, and things like that, which is not the case for databases that are SQL-like, relational databases. So in a relational database, you'd have to go through migrations and stuff like that. First is a document database, so we don't actually need to go through that struggle. So at least you would go ahead and create. Once we click create database, we can leave the default database ID, and here we can also select where we want our database to be located. So here you're told, after setting this location, this is where your Cloud Firestore data will be stored. And after you set this location, you cannot change it later. So if you want to change it to something different, it's best that you think about it and get to reach this point and switch that. But I shall go with name 5, United States, and click next. At this, we can choose to start in production mode or start in test mode. We could choose to start in test mode. Ideally, we are testing out the tool. And in a few seconds, CloudFast will be provisioned for us, and we should be able to see our database. A little while setting up security rules, which is also a pro of using Firestore, that you can be able to define your security rules any day, anytime. And looking at Cloud Firestore right over here, you can be able to add another database. You should also be able to see the rules that you do have set up. Right over here, we can see that there is a security rule here for allow read and write operations if the request time is less than this timestamp. And ideally, we can also be able to adjust this for so many other documents, other collections that we shall have. So if you're familiar with SQL databases in Firestore, that's the best way for you to relate to that is through collections. So a collection is more like a table in this case. So in case you want to allow read, write operations on a certain table or a certain collection, we shall be able to, define that right in there as well. You can also set up indexes, and in here you can be able to set them up as complex as you might want. And you can match data across different fields by indexing combinations of these fields in a collection. And you can now, with that, you'll be able to run your desired query in your application and get data after performing a couple of operations that you might want. You also do have a data recovery. It's a new feature for you to use. Usage, you can also know how many reads are you having to your database, how many writes, how many deletions are you having, snapshot listeners, active connections. You also get to have you can also see the rules, metrics. Is it that there are a bunch of people trying to reach your database that you did not permit, and stuff like that? But Firestore also has a couple of extensions that you could get to leverage with it. You can get to use the Stream Firestore to BigQuery extension. It's a really amazing one if you want to leverage BigQuery and export your data from Firebase to BigQuery and perform a couple of complex data analysis on it, and so many other things, and so many other extensions right in here. Okay, so we shall just go ahead and dive right in. So we've set up our application. We can just head over right here to the project overview. At the project overview, you would need to add an app. So we shall go ahead and select this option right over here where we can add a web app, and we can call it my web app, or we can change it. We can call it real-time app, and we get to register it. So once you register it over here, this is where you get to access the Firebase SDK, and you'll be able to use those credentials in your app. Okay, so I'll just go back to the next steps for us to set up. So we've now set up our database. We've set up, we've gotten access to the Firestore. We've gotten access to the Firestore, to the Firebase SDK, and where we shall get these variables from. So we shall just go right in here and yeah, get started. So for us to have our application running, we need to do a couple of things first. And one of those is installing the packages that we shall use. So there are primarily 3 packages that we're going to install. And one of those is going to be, so I'll just type npm install Firebase as the very first. Excuse me. Then we shall also need TanStack Query oh, sorry, it's TanStack React Query. And the other that we shall need is TanStack Query Firebase. And since we are working in React, we shall use the React package. So once you press enter, oh, we spelled Firebase wrongly. We'll just go ahead and redo that. Just go ahead and correct the spelling of Firebase. Okay, so our packages should be installing shortly. And yeah, so the new dependencies that have been added are TanStack Query Firebase React at version 1.0.7 and TanStack React Query at 5.67 and Firebase 11.40. So even when we check our package.json, we should be able to see TanStack Query Firebase, the React package, right there being registered, and the TanStack React Query package as well, and Firebase as well as a. So we get to see all our dependencies right in there. So once we do have our dependencies, we can now go ahead and set up. So for our setup of TanStack Query and Firebase will happen right in here. So right in here, we shall actually pull up, shall just head over to here, cut these, we shall cut those environment variables and create a Firebase config, object right here and paste that right in. We'll just go ahead and remove these. All right. So ideally, these are the configurations that we're going to use to set up our Firebase app. So there are a bunch of things we're going to do here. We're going to set up a Firebase app. Then we shall also set up a Firestore database. Then we shall also set up React Query, TanStack React Query. So for us to have a Firebase app, we can store it in a variable called Firebase app, and we declare our variable right over there, and we need to call the method initialize app. From the initialize app method is from Firebase/app, and in this we shall pass our Firebase config. So ideally, all these environment variables are being pulled up from what we declared in our .env. So we do have our Firebase app there initialized, but then there are situations where this file will run, and in that instance, we shall have a Firebase app created. So we don't want to keep reinitializing applications. So what we can do to solve that is to get apps. There's another method that we can use to get apps from Firebase, sorry. And we'll just call that and check the length. If the length is equal to 0, then we should go ahead and initialize the app. Else, get an existing app and get the very first instance that we do have for that application and use that. It's as simple as that. So now we also need to set up our DB. We shall declare a variable right over here and then call get Firestore from Firebase Firestore, and it should be okay. We'll just go ahead and type it here. Import get Firestore. So we shall pass our Firebase app to Firestore. But we want to use this database in multiple places in our application, so I'll just go ahead and export. Oh, sorry. Oh, wait. We actually supposed to be doing this in the main.tsx. Sorry about that. So we'll just get these and move them right here. So this is where we meant to do all that. we'll just remove that and return and undo everything we've done in here. So ideally, all this was supposed to be in the other file. Okay, so we are back to the initial state of this file, and we shall get back to our main.tsx, and this is where we want to do all that initialization and all that stuff. So we were setting up our Firebase DB. We want to export it. Shall go ahead and export it. And okay, I think this was also not supposed to be here. So our app is kind of complaining, so we need to import it. I think we got rid of the import during that. Okay, so all is good now. We should also be able to verify that our application is still running and it's still live. So what we've done so far, we've been able to set up a Firebase app. We've also set up a Firestore database. Now we want to set up TanStack Query. So we shall go ahead and set up a client. And for our client, we shall initialize a new instance of the query client from TanStack Query. So we need a query client. Okay. We'll just look out for we'll just confirm if we installed TanStack Query. Okay, we have that. So we want to, I think my IntelliSense is having an issue, but we want to import from TanStack React Query, and we want query client at this point. So the query client is over there. We shall just come and call it here. And yeah, so we have a query client instantiated right over there. So once we do have a query client instantiated, we now want to set up a query provider. And here we shall call the query client provider, and we shall wrap our application inside that. Then here we need to set our client to client. Oh, sorry, not context. Don't know why it's, my IntelliSense must be having an issue. But we needed the query client provider. So we are now all good. We can still verify that our application is still running. So at this point, we ideally have a bunch of things set up for us. I'll just remove this variable as it's not necessary. So at this point, we have everything set up for us and ready for us to get started with the building. So I know you're excited to see us adding the data and us getting to view the data. We are getting to that interesting part. So right now we have all that set up, and this is a point where we now get to do the magic. Okay, so for us to be a little organized, we shall go ahead and add a components folder right over here. And in components, we shall create a component called expense list.tsx. So in here, we shall just call it export. We shall create a normal React, a React component called expenses list, and we shall return a div at that. Okay. So in here, that's where we now want to go ahead and get to start using TanStack Query Firebase. So I'll just go ahead and you remember we talked about our data being stored in collections. So right over here, we're going to use a collection query. So I'll just go ahead and call the use collection query from TanStack Query Firebase. It will show up like that. But this can have a couple of variables that it will expose for us. So as we get to see it over there. So in here, it takes up a bunch of things, and we can just hover over this and get to see that it expects 2 arguments, but got 0. So the very first that we shall have to pass, the very first argument that we shall have to pass is our collection. Ideally, we need to reference a collection somewhere. So for our collection, we shall import collection from Firebase Firestore. And in this, we shall call the DB that we set up. We want our collection name to be expenses. And outside that, we shall be able to also set up, we shall set up a query key. So query keys are basically what's going to enable us to be able to, invalidate data in case we want to the data to show up immediately after creating it and things like that. But then this hook will be able to expose to us the data that shall be able to use. It can also expose to us the loading state. It can also expose to us any error states. And with those, you can be able to set up some logic here to check if there's a loading state that's active. You can be able to return maybe a paragraph that has loading and something like that, just to signify to us that data is loading. Or if there's an error, we want to be able to maybe return an error that probably says error loading expenses. Okay, so with that, we now are ready to use our data. So first, use our data, since it's it's expenses, and we shall be working with a couple of fields alongside that. So one of the things we could do is to have a table. So for us to have a table, we shall need to declare it and call the HTML table, and in the table we shall need a feed. And in that, we shall need a table row. And in the table row, we shall need a table. Sorry, we shall need a table heading. And one of these could be, we could call it a name, or we could call it amount actually. We could have amount right over there. So all the data that we are going to get will be in the table body. And in the table body, we shall still have a table row and table data. And since our data is going to be in an array, so we shall need to map and loop over it. So we shall do that right over here in the table body, so that every row gets to have some data. So once our data is available, we want to pull up the collections, and that's what we now want to map. So in here, we can have our data, can call it doc, then maybe an index, then we can go ahead and return our row. Okay, so we have that. And all right, so we should be all good to see some data coming up soon. So since it's React, we shall need a key over here, and for that we shall use the index. In here we shall get our doc, and on the document we shall have the data. So ideally what we can do is we can just bring this over here and create a new variable and say expenses data, something like that, and store our data in there. So here, so that we get to just access the data in such a way so that we don't have to change so many values. All right, so at this point we've set ourselves up to receive some data, and if we just get to come here and refresh, we don't see anything happening. Ideally, we've created our component that handles the data fetching, but we've not rendered it in our app.tsx. So we'll just go ahead and import that right over here. And once that's imported there, oh yeah, you can now see it's loading amount, but we don't have any data in our database. So we are now going to move on to that other step of creating data, and we should be able to see it in our database. So even in our database right over here, we can come and try to see what we do have in the, we'll just click Firestore database. And in Firstore database, we can see loading collections, we have nothing in here. But when we start creating our data, it will be able to show up in there. So we've now seen how we can how we can set up queries and query data from a collection and be able to render it. And to use the TanStack Query Firebase hook, ideally that would be a hook called use collection query. TanStack Query Firebase offers a bunch of hooks that you can as well leverage, but this is one of them that you can be able to use, and you can get to have everything that TanStack Query has, and you can define all those things in here, query keys, you can have enabled booleans defined in here, and so many other things. If you get to check out the documentation of TanStack Query, we did have an open tab. We'll just go ahead and pull up TanStack Query, and here you can, if you get to check out the query. Okay, let me just go to docs directly, and okay, so if you go to queries, ideally you should be able to perform all these just as we can see right over here. So this is the beauty of TanStack Query Firebase. It gets you all that off the shelf. You get to leverage all the superpowers from a TanStack query, and you can be able to use them with Firebase easily, query your database, manage asynchronous operations, be able to manage caching and stuff like that of data, refetch data whenever you want, and so many other things. Okay, so we are now ready to add some data. So for us to add data, we shall go ahead and create another component right over here and call it maybe create expense .tsx. Again, we shall set up a React component, which will be a functional component. We shall call it create expense, and we'll just get right over here, return it, return a div. Okay, we are now all good to now create our expense component. So ideally, our expense component is going to contain a form that will enable us to set up, that will enable us to add data, more like create mutations, and be able to add data easily. Okay, so here we shall need to call we shall want to call a hook that's we shall want to use, there are a couple of options that we can use. We could use the use set document mutation, which is still from TanStack Query Firebase. And we can also be able to use the add document, whichever we want, but we can use either that we want and be able to achieve what we want to do. But for starters, we shall go ahead and set up our form right here. So we shall need an HTML form, and in our HTML form we shall have a div, and one of our first items will be the amount, as we had already defined that. So that will be an input, and in here we shall want to, we can actually have a self-closing tag for input, and for input we shall need to pass a couple of things, such as for the input we shall need to pass a value. We shall also need to pass a type, an onChange, and we'll just go ahead and call the onChange event listener. We shall also need to pass the type. Ideally, the type of our the type of our amount should be a number. But then we also need to create this data instead. So we'll just go ahead and set state for the expenses so that we get to pull the values from right over there. So we'll just go ahead and set up this use set, and in here we can now set the defaults that initially our amount will be 0. And the other values that we also want to track are category. We can set up a category right over here, and our category will be a string. We shall also want to have a date, and our date will also be a string. We shall also want to have a description maybe of our expense, and that will also be a string. So right in here, we can now just reference any of those for the value. For example, amount. And whenever anything changes in that input, we can also now go ahead and create another function right over here to handle the on change, and call it maybe handle change. And in this, it will receive an event, and on receiving that event, we basically want to set the expense. And on setting the expense, on setting the expense, we want to be able to spread all the existing expenses and append to them. So ideally, we want to pull up the current expenses. We don't want to clear what's already existing whenever we are adding. So here we need to, oh, this was just expense. Could call it expenses. And so that expenses will be an array. We could go ahead and spread it there, but then we also want to go ahead and add the newly added input. So we shall access that using the event.target.name, and its value will be the event.target.value. Okay. So here we can first pass that as any, and we shall have to call our handle change right over there. So ideally, we just can set up these, can just duplicate this for all the other items that we shall have. Though for the category, we want to use a select. So we'll just get rid of this and create a select right over here. So the select should ideally have some options. So maybe the first option could be select category, ideally a placeholder, and its value will be just an empty string. So here we can go ahead and create some other items such as food. We could have an expense for transport. We could have an expense for internet. And these are the options that we shall be able to select. So also the values, we'll just change that as well. This becomes transport. And we also get to have internet right over there. Okay. So the other that we shall have, we can just check. The other will be date. We have our date. It will be of a type date, and we also do have description. Description can be of type text, and we shall also just change this to reference the description. But then we shall also need a button, a way for us to submit the data. We can have our button with the type submit, and its label will be submit. Okay, so for our form to submit, we shall need an on submit right over here, and we can also create another function called handle submit. So we shall go ahead, set up a handle submit right here, and okay. So the handle submit will ideally also take in an event, and here we want to prevent default submission. So we shall have event.prevent dot prevent default. So with event.prevent default, we are basically preventing default submission. And yeah, so this is where our hook is going to take action. So ideally, that's where all the logic and all the magic for us to add this data is going to happen at. Okay, so we could just check it out and see what we have running as of now. Our application is right over here. Okay, it's not yet showing. We can now get in here and try to import that component. Create expense. We can check again. Okay, we can see our little form right over here. And we can add some amounts. And yeah, so ideally it's currently not okay, so it doesn't seem to be switching. Let's try any of these others and see if we can set the data. Okay. All right. So at this point, we now need to fix our form to be able to enable us type in and have our data get into these different and have our data get into these different inputs. So ideally, we could now get to check out what ideally is not working out fine. We do have our state. I'm managing all that. We do have our inputs right over here, and we do have our type number on submit that, and our value type number. Okay, seems like something is not right. We'll just go ahead and give this a second eye and see why. We'll actually first try to refresh and see. Okay, our form is not capturing the values. Okay. We shall go ahead and fix this. Okay. Our input is right over there. We do have a value right over here, and the value is the expense dot amount. And okay. Input value expense, the description, trying to find where there could be something going wrong. Set expense, pulls up the expenses, runs over those, event.target.name, and that pulls up the event.target.value. Okay. All right. So we can actually just, to save time on, checking out this, we shall just get back to fix that. All right. But so for us to experiment and see that our data is actually being queried and pulled up right over here, we can go ahead and test it right over here. Or alternatively, we could Okay. We'll just go ahead and so we can now just go ahead and proceed on from there. And now we do have, oh, it was actually just this part that ideally was preventing that was preventing us from typing into our form. Okay, we'll just pull up this real quick over there.
Yeah, it's always tricky when you're doing a live coding session because that's when all the problems kind of come by. It's also good
Yes.
for the viewers to see. Yeah, at times you hit those walls, and at times you actually can debug for hours, and you find that it's a minor issue. So just take your time.
Sure, no worries. No worries, really. Okay. Okay, we have an issue. All right. Trying to figure out that. So potentially one of the issues could give it a name. This was category. This input was for date. This was, we need a name for the description. Okay. All right, we'll just go ahead and check out our form. Ideally doesn't do anything. Okay, it was the name that was ideally required to that. So we can now test it out and see that we do have that. We can select a date And we can also add, this is a, let's say maybe this is a test. For us to test that, we could try to, in our handle submit, this is ideally where we shall be. This is ideally where we shall be, submitting the data and all that. So in here, we can go ahead and console.log the expenses that have ideally been created. So, but it would be better for us to actually call it expense, because we want this to track the current expense that's being added. So we'll just rename this back to expense so that it's not confusing. Okay, so we want to console log the expense that we shall be adding to our database. So if we do come right over here on submit and check the console and try to add a value right here, maybe add a category that, try to select a date, try to add anything there and submit. Yeah, sure. We can see our amount and all that data showing up right over here. So this is the data that we want to be able to insert into our database. Okay, so let's now get to implement that. So right over here, let's get to use the set document mutation. And for us to use the document mutation, would ideally need to do the same thing that we did, with the query. So we can call it a create expense mutation, and this will be a variable calling out the use set document mutation. So if you've used Firebase, usually when you want to add data or add a document to a Firestore collection, we need to add a document reference right over here. So in our document reference, we want to pass the collection that we are working with. In that, we first pass the database, then we get to talk about the table or the collection that we want to insert into. But okay, something here is not defined. Doc, okay, from Firebase, import that. And the other thing that we might as well want to do, so right over here, all the side effects from TanStack Query can as well get to work in here. For example, on success, we can do something on success, and we can call that function right over here, and any other that you might want to work with. But what we are most interested in is to mutate the data and be able to insert this expense into our database. So we shall now just go ahead and call our create mutation here, call the mutate method and pass our expense. So ideally what's happening here is inserting the expense into Firestore at that point. So we can now go ahead and try it out. Okay, so we could actually first add the other fields to our table. We could just go right back here, and the other field will be category that we might want to have rendering there. We might also want to have the date, and we also want to have the description. Maybe one thing, we also don't want to submit empty fields. We'll just say all these fields are required before submissions get to happen. So it's more like a validation that we are getting to add right over here. Okay, so we shall first check out our database and see if everything is still okay. Right over here. We'll just refresh and see. Okay. Also, I think we clicked and one of these empty ones got added. So currently we get to see our collection exists and there's that. So even if we go to delete this and try to be sure that this is happening in real time, we'll just go ahead and delete that, refresh our database, and get back to this and try to create a new entry. So for example, one of our expenses could be food, that the food costs 5,000 and the category is food, food for today, Friday, and we'll just say food expense. So once we submit, we want to be able to check our database. Oh, we also want to add some loading state right over here so that we can know when it's done inserting. So how we get to do that, we can also just come right over here and dynamically show that. So if create mutation is pending, we want to show submitting. Else, just show submit. Okay, so I think that got added, but we can actually see it already showing up. So we can also just confirm our database. We'll just come here and refresh. And on refreshing, we can see our collection is there. We do have a document. Yeah, and it was food expense, the one we just added. Why is it not showing the other category, the food, the date and description right over here? We probably didn't add them to the fields being rendered. Yeah, that was right. So we need to now show category right over here. We need to fetch it. We need to get the date. We also need to get the description. So if we just make that change, we can see that our data now comes through. But we can now go ahead and try to create another expense, maybe 10,000 on transport. That will be maybe like on Monday, and we can call this a transport expense and try to submit. Oh yeah, you can now see that we do have that submitting set. Once it's done, it disappears. But there's another issue here, that we get to have these values remain. Once it's submitted, we want that to clear up, and we also want, anyway, let's get to one by one. So the very first thing is we want these values to disappear once the submission happens. Where do we do that? We get back to our create. So on completion of that, we could actually get to have a try catch block here, so that our insertion happens in the try, and once that gets successfully inserted, we could just pull up these default values from state and just paste them right here, so that the fields go blank once the insertion completes. Okay, so we can now try again and see 3,000 for internet today, and can say internet expense. So when we submit, it clears up, and we can check our database and try to see if we have all those entries showing up. Yeah, so we have our internet expense, our transport expense, and our food expense. But there's another problem. It's not happening in real time. It doesn't happen right away that that data comes here. So how do we get to do that? When we were setting up our query, our collection query right over here, we defined an expenses query key. So this expenses query key is what we can invalidate at the point of creation. How do we get to do that? The TanStack query, we could actually have some resource here. We'll just follow this so that you can get to see. So for us to invalidate a query, this is what we would have to do. Call the query key, invalidate queries, and pass the query key over there. So where do we find our query client? We did create our query client right over here. So in order to use the same query client, we'll just go ahead and export this, come to the create expense, and import it right over here. So on success, whenever a creation succeeds, we want to call our query client. We want to use the one that we've just exported. Okay, so query client dot invalidate queries. Is it exported? Oh, it's just called client. So we shall need to change this to client, not query client. Client.invalidate queries. And in that, we get to pass the query key. Then we define the query keys that we want to invalidate. So what we want to invalidate is this expenses. So that whenever we make our creation, that query key gets invalidated and the data shows up right away. Okay, we'll just come back right over here, refresh the page, and try to create a food expense. So food, we'll create it for 1st March, and we'll call it food expense. So once we add that, we see our submission happening, and yeah, so it's now happening in real time. We can see that getting added. We could try to add another one, and maybe transport expense, and for 21st, and yeah, could call it maybe test. And we can also see that getting created. So we can also just verify with our database if everything is still looking good. And yeah, all good. So that brings us to the end of this session, where we get to, leverage TanStack Query and, use these hooks, pull up a couple of side effects, perform things on success, perform things on, when anything happens. You can also manage notifications in there or anything you might want. But yeah, so this brings us to the end. I don't know if there are any questions, but thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Hassan. Great to have you. It's been a lengthy session, but for the viewers, if there are any questions, of course, you can always leave them on the chat, and we'll reach out to Hassan in case any needs his attention. But again, he had shared his socials, so you can reach out to him as well. And for us at Firebase Kenya, thank you, Hassan, for your time. We really appreciate, and we are sure our viewers appreciate as well. So thank you, and maybe we'll prepare and have another session in the near future.
Yeah, definitely. I think we shall talk about that. Thank you too.
Okay. Good night, everyone. Bye.
Bye. Good night.